Richard Sherman even brought it up, it kind of like, to me, reminded like if I'm a friend and I'm always gossiping about, my uncle or something to my other friend, it seemed like Richard Sherman even was like, oh, I know what you're talking about. Did you have any thoughts on Jimmy Ward's comments about his relationship with Kyle Shanahan and how they handled the end of Jimmy Ward's career? And then also about his comments on whether or not he thought Jimmy Garoppolo could go last season.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of thoughts on the Jimmy Ward contract situation, what he thought, because I know the story. And I can't share the story.
Okay.
But I know the full story of what happened with Jimmy Ward's contract. And so that one didn't really surprise me. It didn't surprise me that he had some negative feelings on the way out. But I also just understand that that's the business of the NFL. And that's just kind of what happens. And that's why when you understand, hey, and that's why sometimes even being loyal to a team as a fan can be difficult, because it's a dirty business like any other corporation. And I think the problem is that people deify the NFL a little bit because they project some childhood feeling of unity where the coach is kind of like a father figure in their life when they're playing like Park District sports and you're all best friends and you have orange slices after the game and you sing Kumbaya. But that's not the reality of what the actual sport is like. It's just like any other workplace, and the NFL is a business, just like any other corporation, with the number one goal to make money. And therefore, whatever crappy things happen for any other person in corporate America happens to these guys in the NFL. They're just paid double the scale of the average person in corporate America. And people sometimes, I think, find it difficult to relate because they're relating the wrong things to that. These people are coworkers, they're employees, they work in this place all together the same way anybody else works with their peers in any other job. It just so happens that their profession is a sport that people usually project and identify childhood memories with. And that's where I think there is a little bit of a conflation in how people talk about it, specifically in regards to his quote about Garoppolo playing. I think it's been taken a little bit out of context, because what he says immediately after is he references Earl Thomas, who was having an all-pro season his final year with Seattle, and he snapped his leg in Josh Rosen's first career game against Arizona. And he snaps his leg and gets carted off the field. And when he's going, he flicks off Pete Carroll in the sideline. Why did Earl Thomas do that? Because they were making Earl Thomas, who was arguably the greatest player in that franchise's history, at least in that portion of the history, in the Legion of Boom Seahawks, in that era of Seattle Seahawks football, you could argue that Earl Thomas was the single best football player of that era for the Seattle Seahawks. And they didn't give him a second contract after a long dispute. And now he had gotten hurt, which hurt his opportunity to get money. Now, Earl Thomas was lucky enough to get a bullshit, horrible, great contract in his case from Baltimore that he only played 1 year on before him and his brother had some fun and that entire thing happened. But that's what Jimmy Ward was referencing when he was talking about Garoppolo. And that's where I think that the situation with Garoppolo is a little more complicated than, wait, was there a chance he could have played? Because there was a business thing involved. And if you're Garoppolo, realistically, as much as every 49ers fan wants Garoppolo to play for their team because that's what he's supposed to do, and we're all supposed to give up everything for the team because that's what, like, we're taught as kids, like, hey, kids, give up everything for the team, be that selfless person. If you're Garoppolo, you're still somewhat hurt. You have to put your body on the line, but you know that you also have the capacity to make $25 million a year in your next contract, and you don't want to hurt that, especially when you're not going to reach any of the incentives with the 49ers. You had to make the same business decision that the 49ers had to make. The 49ers made a business decision with Jimmy Ward that forced Jimmy Ward to feel a little bit upset about it, and the 49ers felt a little bit upset. It's the same thing vice versa that Jimmy Garoppolo made a business decision. I don't think it's the big deal that it's been made out to be. I think it's a big deal, again, because people want to believe that everybody sings Kumbaya in the locker room, so therefore that everybody should give up everything for the league and the team. And stories like when Ronnie Lott gets the tip of his finger amputated get deified to the point and sensationalized to the point that it feels like any player who doesn't give up anything for the team is somehow doing something wrong. I just feel like it's the business of the NFL. Garoppolo made a business decision for himself. The 49ers constantly make business decisions for themselves. As a fan, it sucks, but that's the reality. I can't really disparage anybody for doing what they feel is in their best interest.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like I tend to side with players, like with players on this. You have a very short career. You know that the second you're hurt and that if the team can save money, that they're not going to prioritize you. So it is extremely important to prioritize yourself. I think it would have been a cool story if Jimmie could have came back. But I mean, he got himself a lot of money for that Raiders contract that is looking very interesting.
And he wasn't healthy. He needed surgery anyway. So who the hell knows?
Yeah, that's true. I remember people were saying, like, I think it was David Lombardi at the time. They were like, prior to that game, he kept saying like he was going to be able to come back, and then he ended up needing a whole other surgery. Like he definitely wasn't. He missed training camp with the Raiders. Like he wasn't even close to
right. Well, but then David Lombardi was also adamant that Garoppolo always could come back at the moment of his injury. He was the one tweeting out the timeline saying that he would come back by that period. So who knows?
Yeah. That was interesting. But yeah, I mean, I found Jimmie. I do see what you mean. Like I think it's hard for fans to completely like separate because and even probably players, because I think in order to put your body on the line for the team, which I know it's also for money, I think you do have to buy into that camaraderie. Like they do call each other brothers and family. Those terms are thrown around when
they call each other brothers and family when they're winning.
Interesting.
They all make business decisions when they're losing. They understand the nature of the business. I think it's just to sell the sport in a better way because people like the group of people that do it together against the world. Like those are the stories people like.
Which is why it's so annoying during off seasons. Like if this season with Brandon Ayuk, if he wants a ton of money and does something like with the Debo situation, it wasn't as bad with Nick Bosa. I think he was a little bit more quiet about it. But I think it started to get there when there was like a chance that he was going to miss game one, with fans being highly critical of players when they're kind of trying to make sure that they're getting what they deserve, which they definitely need to do because the team would do the same thing, as we could tell from Jimmie Ward's comments. But I did think, even though I know that, like in my rational
but he's
brain,
the perfect example, right? He's the longest tenured player on the team. He switched his position 3 different times in the regime. If you remember, he was supposed to be their starting safety in 2017. He got hurt. They ended up thinking Adrian Colbert was their starting safety. Terrible decision. Jimmie Ward was a corner in 2018. They moved him back to safety after bringing him back on a 1-year deal in 2019. He plays terrific. They give him a 4-year contract extension. He has 2 great years at safety, and then they try to move him to be their nickel corner because they sign a veteran safety into Sean Gibson. So they made business decisions. He made business decisions. Now, you can understand from his position, he's the longest tenured player on the team. He was a team captain. He was a vocal leader. He had always put the team first. He had made all of these different sacrifices for the organization. And they still didn't make any effort. Like they treated him like any other employee. There was no special treatment of Jimmie Ward because of all of that. And I would say that I would criticize the 49ers if there was a special treatment to Jimmie Ward because of that, because that's not how you run a business. That's not how you succeed in the NFL. You have to make tough decisions, and sometimes tough decisions include people being upset, but you have to make decisions for the right reasons, because you have to do what's best for your football team. And similarly, Jimmie Ward had to do what's best for himself. He got a nice contract in Houston. He lives in Houston in the offseason, so it's perfect for him. That's a perfect situation for him, and he's played well in the couple of games that he's played. And again, relating that to Garoppolo made a decision to put himself first. He made a decision that he felt was best for himself, and I'm never going to disparage him for that. And similarly, I wouldn't disparage the 49ers for feeling upset about it, but I also wouldn't disparage them for making any decision like in the Jimmie Ward situation when they do something business-wise that's best for themselves.
Definitely. I agree. I found it, I think, like I said, even in my rational mind, I can go, okay, this is a business and everything. I did find it hard to hear Jimmie Ward. Like it definitely seemed, it's the way he described it was kind of like, maybe when he came into the league, he was more hopeful. Like if I do everything right, if I change my position, if I do whatever they ask, that this team might treat me.
Let me put it like this. The interesting question about it is Jimmie Ward told that story about how Shanahan basically forced him to play nickel this year.
Yeah, said he
could. The 49ers wanted, let's just pretend like they wanted to sign Jimmie Ward. Like, let's just go down to hypothetical land for a second. let's pretend like they wanted Jimmy Ward to sign for X amount of money this offseason, and they didn't officially offer it to him, but there was conversation about that offer with Jimmy Ward, and Jimmy Ward said no to it. If Jimmy Ward had said yes, do you think that they would have forced him to change his position to nickel? Or do you think part of that was knowing that he wasn't part of their long-term plans? Gibson might have been, so they could foster a year of Gibson and Hufanga and figure out the nickel situation later. Thought to ponder. Just saying. Who knows?
Definitely. And those like players aren't.
I can't say much more about the situation, but
players aren't like neglect. Players aren't like oblivious to that. Like I think Jimmy Ward even made a comment that like at one point he wasn't going to come back for the Chiefs game, and on the podcast he was like, I knew I had to come back in the Chiefs game because I'm not stupid. I'm seeing the other players perform well, and like I know these players, they understand that it's a what have you done for me lately league. I think a lot of people talk about like, is there pressure that is put on necessarily by a team for a player to play injured? And I think whether or not, I think that can be debated. Like there definitely might be literal like comments made, but I think also it just comes on like players aren't stupid. They're aware that they need to be there.
And there's no security regardless of how good you are or whatever. Like you don't have a choice. Even if you're a really, really good player, they can cut you tomorrow. And we've seen that happen. And that's why they feel that innate pressure to keep working and keep getting better, because you just never know when the organization says goodbye to you.
This is off topic, but I had hypothesized this offseason that Nick Bosa was going to try to get a fully guaranteed contract. I thought that's why because when the contract came out, I didn't understand why they left it so long. Like it didn't seem unlike anything that I thought that Nick Bosa was going to get. And so I was kind of a little bit frustrated. I'm like, okay, why wouldn't they have given this to him earlier and had him show up to camp and everything? Before we found out what he got, when that process was going on, I was hypothesizing that maybe he was trying to push for that for fully guaranteed deal. Since we've seen quarterbacks push for it, I thought maybe defensive ends. I think I heard Taylor Lewan on a podcast like 2 years ago. Someone asked him like, oh, well, why don't you try to get a fully guaranteed contract? And he was like, it'll start with quarterbacks getting it, then it'll be defensive ends. Like it'll have to slowly go down the rankings of the most important positions in the NFL. But that's a side note. Just we were talking about they can cut you whenever you want. And I was thinking about contracts and Nick Bosa's deal. But yeah. Let me check to make sure there's no more comments. Jimmy Ward wanted to play safety, not nickel or corner. Agree. He talked about that, and that's what he's doing in Houston right now. So, yeah. Do you have any other comments or anything that you have thought about with this upcoming matchup against Dallas, or the 4-0 start that the 49ers have had so far?
Nah, I have nothing else. I think we covered it all. Congratulations to you on starting your channel. This was very, very fun to do.
Thank you so much for joining me. This is a side note, but I mean, everyone in here is in here because of you. But I've so appreciated your knowledge. I feel like I've learned so much from your tweets, from listening to you over the last couple of years. And then just like personally, you being so kind and like explaining anything that I've ever had questions on. I really, really appreciate you coming on and all the insight that I get.
Anytime. I like talking to other people. I'm a fan. Other people are fans. I'm into this because I like talking about football. That's really the only thing that keeps me involved in it. The other stuff, I could take it or leave it. Some of the stuff that comes with being involved in talking about sports in any capacity. But I'm willing to talk to anyone and anyone as long as they just want to talk football. And you are very genuinely interested in the sport, and you always have a lot of things to say. And so I really enjoyed doing this show.